10 years. It has been 10 long years since Tobias and the Half Pariah first launched on YouTube, and we have never been the same since. Tobias and the Half Pariah is by far the strangest and yet most creative Thomas movie of all time. And to think, 10 years later, it got a sequel. Now, before I talk about the sequel like I promised I would, let me first talk about Tobias and Half Pariah itself. First off, I did mention this in my initial review when I was talking about 3 random Thomas films, but I didn't give it enough credit. I love how this movie starts off with Toby's backstory in the Railway series, and how it plays out like a Railway series story at first. I originally thought that this was a negative, though. That this was just false advertising. But now that I think about it, and now that I'm actually starting to understand film, I had to take an entire class, by the way, I now realize that's not a negative. It's a positive. I now seen what Tynes is trying to do. He was trying to set the scene and make us feel comfortable in a familiar setting, only to then tear it away at the last second. And man, if that's what he was trying to do, he succeeded. I say that because the sequel does it also. The sequel and this movie are tied so well. Another thing I really love about this movie, one thing I actually got right in my original review, is the fact that it focuses on Toby. Like I said, this could have been any other engine. Heck, most likely it could have been Thomas. But no, Tynes chose Toby, and I think that was a brilliant idea. Because Toby is probably the most obscure of the main cast. He's probably got the least amount of episodes right next to Edward. So to have a full movie based off of him, and in such a weird and interesting way, it's inspiring. I love the fact that they used Toby for this movie. And finally, the last thing I like to get out of the way is that, yes, I was right about one other thing. I love how creative this movie gets, while still respecting the source material. It respects where it came from, but it doesn't glue itself to it. It's really good. I also must add that Tyne Sensenang does the perfect voice for Toby. This is legitimately how I imagine Toby sounds. So, with all that out of the way, how is Arcane Merchant? Is it worthy of being called a sequel? No, it's not. It's even better than that. Arcane Merchant is by far one of the best Thomas fan films of all time. And I don't say that lightly. We have a lot of good ones. I don't know if I would say it's the best one of all time, but it's definitely in the top 10. Heck, maybe even the top 3. It's that good. There's so much this movie does right, but let's start with the obvious one. This movie looks so much better than the original. And I mean so much better. You can really tell that this movie had a lot more time put into it. You can tell that Tynes really wanted this to be the movie. And I think all of his effort really paid off. Let's start with one thing right away. Toby is much better in this film than he was in the previous. He wasn't bad in the previous film. In fact, I think he worked perfectly for that. But he's just better here. He feels more like Toby from the TV series. Character-wise, at least. As very carefree and enjoying life, but still very, very serious when he needs to get serious. I also love the fact they don't even try to hide the fact that Toby has superpowers on this one. We already seen that in the last movie, so we don't need to build it up again. I also really love the music here. Yeah, I can get a little generic at some points, but there are many themes that are just chef's kiss. And that's saying something because Thomas and Friends music is already really good and it's really hard to top it. But somehow I think that the Half Merchant, sorry, Arcane Merchant, I don't know why I keep wanting to call it Half Merchant, has a great soundtrack, especially for Oliver. Oliver is perfect. At least his theme is. I like how it starts off stringy and soft and quiet, showing his reserved nature. But then it slowly builds up to be more dramatic. Until it finally climaxes in the end, only for it to go back to the way it was before. It's actually pretty brilliant. I also really love how little things are set up very early in the movie. Like that coach in the background you see behind Henrietta. No attention's drawn to it at first, but it's there, and you know it's going to be important when the camera zooms in on it. I also really like Thomas in this movie. He's not the typical Thomas that we see in the TV series. He's more like Railway Series Thomas, where he respects the other engines, but you get on his nerve and he's going to strike at you. Most people say that his words to Henrietta were a little too mean, but honestly, that's just kind of how Thomas is. I also really enjoyed how James is portrayed. He's sort of the leader of the railway, and in typical James fashion, he lets his ego get the best of him. There is a lot I could say, but if I say any more, I'm going into spoiler territory. Which I will say now. Spoilers ahead. If you have not seen this movie yet, watch it first. Not only because I recommend it wholeheartedly, but also because nothing I'm gonna say in just a second is gonna make any sense to you. The Warshire reset scene was a chilling one. In fact, a lot of this movie was actually pretty chilling, looking back on it. The last one was all action. This one seems to be action horror. And I was not expecting Thomas and Friends, of all franchises, to be used in this fashion. But it worked so well. In fact, this scene was actually pretty hard to watch. Mainly due to this part, where Toby gets reset. Toby sounds like he's in actual pain and suffering and... oh, this scene was just uncomfortable. But that's just how brilliant it was done. I love this scene. And then we get our biggest twist of the movie, Tobias. I have seen a lot of Thomas villains and different takes on said Thomas villains over the years, from evil diesels to evil steam engines, evil humans to even eldritch abominations. I'm not kidding about that last one. Really. I'm not. So believe me when I tell you, Tobias is one of the scariest Thomas villains I have ever seen. Every scene he's in, every face he makes, every word he says is just terrifying. His voice is uncanny, mainly due to the fact that it's actually not Tynes voicing Tobias. Yeah, I was surprised by that too. I legitimately thought that Tynes was voicing Tobias, but no, it's someone else. He sounds just like Tobias. He sounds just like him, and it's kind of creepy now. I also really love how this gives new context to Tobias and the Half Pariah. The scariest part about Tobias is by far the fact that he came before Toby. Yeah, Toby is the copy. Meanwhile, Tobias is the real tram engine. This has been hinted at ever since the beginning of the movie, with Rosalind being terrified. Which, by the way, Rosie as an elderly engine, was not expecting that, but still pretty clever. But one thing really set me off with Tobias being the scariest Thomas villain of all time. Thomas's death. I and many other fans, in retrospect, should have seen this coming. Thomas got an unreasonable amount of screen time, but the way it's done was brilliant, but also horrifying. I think out of all the films that kill off Thomas in some way, which there's a surprising amount of them, this was probably the best one. First off, Tobias's transformation into Sans Undertale, which tried telling me that's not true. Thomas's face splitting apart, and this. Tobias constantly ramming into Thomas with the screams, parts flying off of Thomas. This was done perfectly. And there's a reason why this scene, of all scenes, stick with people. Because, well, not only is it the death of of the most famous engine on Sodor, but it also makes perfect thematical sense. And the way it's shot, too, is just perfect in all the wrong ways. And Tobias's line saying that Thomas broke just cemented his standing. And that face. Oh, that face. Now, I actually have seen some comments saying that Thomas's death was unnecessary. Maybe. But I personally think it was actually very much needed for this one. It shows three things. One, just how crazed and unhinged Tobias is. I mean, we saw him do it with a human earlier, but this hits harder. Because that was just a random guy. This is Thomas the Tank Engine. Second, it shows that no one is safe in this universe. No one at all. Not even main characters. And the final thing it shows off, and the real scary thing, is just, well, again, how unhinged Tobias is. He wants to shut up Toby, so he kills his best friend right in front of him. And Oh, man. I'm sorry, this whole thing was just done way too perfectly. I also really like how Toby was tied in to Montague. Yeah, it is a bit dumb in some areas, but it's also perfect in others. Toby and Montague were really not that different if you think about it. Both had little trust, both took drastic measures, and both shared in the hybrid engine. It was a twist, alright. And Tobias being the original is just even scarier. I view Tobias in this fan film. Sorry, I'm going to talk about Tobias again. But I view Tobias in this fan film like Homelander in The Boys. A character who's so powerful and cares so little about the people around him that if you even look at him wrong, you're dead. But that does bring up one question about this movie, and really my only major complaint. Where is Sir Topham Hatt in all of this? He was in the previous movie and played a sizable role. So where is he? Now, don't get me wrong, the absence of humans was actually a pretty nice stylistic choice. It's not that they don't exist, it's the fact that the movie is not all about them. And I really like it. However, the fact that Sir Topham Hatt was put on the list of humans that weren't going to show up is just kind of weird. Especially when you consider that Sir Topham Hatt could have solved a few issues. But I don't think Sir Topham Hatt could have solved everything. In fact, hot take, I don't think Sir Topham Hatt would have been able to do anything. Think about it. If Tobias is like Homelander, then he really wouldn't fear Sir Topham Hatt. In fact, he'd probably kill him the first chance he got. Tobias is just a menace. But I will admit something. Thomas's death was very much necessary for the movie. But the guard's death, not so much. That was just unnecessary. Now granted, it does serve as good horror and as a good way to build up Thomas's death, but I feel like they could have just shown Thomas's death and gotten away with everything just fine. Because it's bad for two reasons. Reason number one, the guard is just a random dude. We really, really have no attachment to him, so he's just kind of there to get killed. And the second problem is, because he's a human, it does bring into question what Sir Topham Hatt is not doing here. Look, I'm not asking for Sir Topham Hatt to come and solve all the problems like most fans are. I'm just asking for a reason why he's not here. Heck, they probably wouldn't even need to do much with that. They could have just had a throwaway line where they said Sir Topham Hatt is on holiday. Seriously, that is all they need to say. And Well, yeah. Tobias and the Arcane Merchant is a wonderful film. It's I don't know if it's my favorite Thomas fan film of all time, but it's definitely one you should watch, especially if you liked the original. Huge thanks to Tyne Sensenine for making this wonderful film, and for probably creating one of the best horror movies, well, horror-ish movies since The Boys. It is just insane. If you're wondering why I haven't gone into huge detail about this movie, the reason is simple. I don't want this video to serve as a replacement for watching the movie. If you're interested in it, just watch it. Anyway, I have been the Gamer Nerd, and say hello to Demon Gordon. Thanks for watching. But seriously, this is such a cool special effect, I had to show it.